Hey everybody, this is Brandon with St. John's Krav Maga and Fitness in the United States Krav Maga Association. Good friend of mine, Robert Higgins, asked me to do a video a little more in detail on my idea of essentially how we teach good people to do bad things to bad people. Now the reason for that is quite simple. In the history of mankind, no matter where you are in the world, the only thing that has ever stopped bad people from doing bad things to good people is good people using violence to do bad things to bad people. So that's why we say we teach good people to do bad things to bad people. Now that's a bit of a process. The inherent problem is bad people, evil people, don't have a problem with doing bad things to good people. It's not something they necessarily have an inherent or an intrinsic resistance to. Good people, on the other hand, have to overcome some barriers to get to a point where they can do bad things to bad people, because they've been raised, I'm not saying incorrectly, their entire lives, but they've been raised, you don't fight, you don't do bad things to bad people, you don't hurt people. They've been taught that it's bad to hurt people. Thou shalt not kill are words that are ubiquitous in our culture. It's a mistranslation from the Bible, but it's something we'll get into later in kind of the process that we go through in getting good people to where they can do bad things to bad people. So we handle that in two ways. One is essentially the Krav Maga training method. It's a method where we take people and we put them into an environment that is very intense. Now, intensity is relative, so we kind of scale that to the individual and we build them up over time. We don't just throw them into a pressure cooker until they collapse. We increase that pressure over time. We make that harder on them over time. But essentially what we teach people right off the bat is how to aggress, how to attack somebody. And again, for a good person, that can be a bit alarming. And I've had people come in and watch our classes and they go, oh my gosh, it looks so violent. I have to agree with them. It is violent, but there's a purpose behind the violence, and it's a righteous kind of violence. We are defending ourselves, we're defending our loved ones. We're not going out and starting fights or attacking people. So it's inherently a very different thing. Now, when we see that violence and that directed violence, again, that's not something people are necessarily ready to do. So a lot of folks come in and they have never expressed physical power against someone. They've really never hit somebody as hard as they could. When we start them off on pads, this is how we're hitting as hard as we can. This is how we attack as hard as we can. We want you to make noise. We want to build that aggression so that you know how to go off like a bomb. And over time, you're hitting a partner that's holding pads. There's such a big difference between hitting a partner holding pads and then hitting focus mitts or hitting the heavy bag. And those are great training tools that I use for all my fighters, but they're just that, they're training tools. When you're actually working with a person, you're physically putting your hands on a person, you're striking the pads that the person is holding, that has a psychological effect. You are learning to aggress toward another human. Yeah, they're our classmates and we're going to be friends, we're going to be buddies, we're not going to be jerks. Nobody wants to hurt anybody else in training, but we want to get them to that point where they can aggress, and that's just a key part of it. The other is through the use of technique. We train techniques. This is how I actually move against another person. Rather than freezing, we've taught them, we've given them a mindset, this is how I do things. So one of the ways we overcome that resistance to violence, people base their responses on essentially two things: recency and primacy. The most recent thing they've done, and then a primary ingrained response. The most recent thing they've done. And herein lies the problem. A good person probably will recently not have attacked somebody and caused them great bodily harm. There are exceptions to that, out of necessity they act. But for a bad person, they will have that recency to rely on. The most recent time I attacked somebody, last time I attacked somebody. So for us, we don't necessarily have that real world experience from a good person because they just want to attack people. So we have to ingrain a primary response. So through training, we try to get the responses as close to automatic as we can, as close to a simultaneous offense and defense as we can. And once we do that, once we ingrain that primary response, we remove a lot of the conscious thought process and we replace it with reaction, a good trained primary reaction. Now the other part that I take on this is through a series of lectures or kind of mini lectures, 2 or 3 minutes that I throw into classes as we go on. And I talk about why violence, what the objections are to violence in the West in general. And a lot of that stems from religious grounds or from other moral grounds. And I mentioned thou shalt not kill earlier. Most biblical scholars agree that's a mistranslation of thou shalt not murder, which are very different things. Murder is unlawful killing. Killing is more of a general term. Killing another person is not necessarily unlawful, immoral, or unethical. It may be the very correct response, and that's what I try to get through in these mini lectures. So I'll tell folks, if a man walking down the street grabs a woman, drags her into the woods, and sexually assaults her, he is using violence and he is doing something bad. Now, if that same woman is walking down the street, the man grabs her to take her to the woods and sexually assault her, and she pulls out a gun and shoots him in defense of her life, she is doing something violent. Just like he was, she is doing something violent, but she is doing something that is not just okay. It's not just what she had to do to defend herself, but it is the morally and ethically correct thing to do in defense of her life. So through a combination of training method and supported information, passing along that information through education, we try to get good folks to the point where they can in fact do bad things to bad people. Now, we want to ingrain this in them because we live in the real world, and we know that typically we don't rise to the occasion. We don't just say, yeah, I'm going to stand up and do these things. We typically fall to the level of our training and experience. So we want to make sure that that training and experience, or that experience that we can build in via training, is efficacious. It actually results in what we want to happen in the real world. That's why Krav Maga is so intense. It's not just a beatdown. That intensity is there because that's what's required in the real world. So guys, want to give another shout out real quick before we go to my friends at New World Defense and Fitness down in Fort Myers. Juan and Alexis, they are awesome. Sent me the t-shirt, appreciate it. If you have any questions in the meantime, anything to add to the conversation, that's always appreciated. You can do it here in the comments. You can contact me directly. Brandon at sjkravmaga.com is my email. Guys, until the next time, stay safe.